Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be dissertating and talking about uh, why astrology is not considered a real science, and it's considered a pseudoscience, and it's not considered or classified as a real science. The so-called experts believe that there's no strong evidence, I guess you could say irrefutable evidence, that shows a correlation between the planets and the zodiac signs, the constellations, and human behavior. Well, many of us that are enamored with astrology would really beg to differ, and we feel that there is a strong correlation for this. It may be, according to the scientists, say there isn't. Now, somebody had done some research, and it was something connected with Mars, and they were, according to one research, it appeared that there was some validity to astrology through this test, but they weren't able to duplicate or replicate it somehow, and I think those were one of the main factors in stating why astrology was not considered a real science. Now, another problem is that you have, as far as the house systems, I think maybe, even though this might not be considered a reason as to why astrology is not classified as one, maybe I'm just wondering with some people's minds why they don't maybe consider it a real science, and maybe the fact is you have these varying, I guess you could say, the house systems and the different kinds of astrology, which include the Western and the Vedic, and that there's nothing like a universal or consistent, I guess you could say, astrological method. And you have, like between the Western astrology and the Vedic, you have maybe about a 23-degree difference between the planets, and perhaps even the house cusp, and that may be playing, I think, a role as well. And even though it might not be the reason that these experts are stating as a reason why they're not considering astrology an actual science, I wonder if that might be factoring in, even though it might not be stated. Also, at some polar latitudes, you can, in many various house systems, you can't calculate a natal chart, and I'm thinking that might factor in as well. And there's other things too. Now, a lot of people that are very strong believers in the Bible, they feel maybe because it says somewhere in the Bible that astrology, it's rebuked, but at the same time, there's at least one passage, I believe, in the Bible that intimates that the three wise men may very well have been astrologers. So that's something to consider. But you just have, I think, a lot of skepticism about astrology, whether it is an actual science or not. And the reality is they can do all the tests, and the problem is, I'm wondering how objective these tests are. Perhaps with some of the tests, I mean, somebody can look at astrology and say, well, gee, I have my sun sign is in the 10th house, but I don't have any kind of leadership or management position. I don't work for the government. I'm not in business. But it doesn't necessarily mean somebody has the sun in the 10th house, for example. It doesn't mean necessarily that those things may happen, but it could very strongly indicate that that's the area that you like to shine in as far as career matters. Now, if somebody were to say, another example can be, well, somebody, say, has a Leo ascendant, right? And for Leo ascendant, the basic description is being very extroverted and gregarious and outgoing and wanting to stand out in a crowd and be showy. Now, let's say though that the person had a preponderance of planets below the horizon in houses 1 through 6. That would factor in. It's not, and that person might very well be more introverted as opposed to somebody with a Leo ascendant with the majority of the planets above the horizon, which would be in houses 7 through 12. I think a lot of the skepticism and cynicism involved with astrology is because there's a lot of people that won't really study it extensively or may look at it superficially. They could look at their sun sign, I guess you could say the daily horoscope for that day, and they'll say, well, gee, I looked at this and this doesn't fit me at all. Or it might say, let's say for example, that they read a description for their sun sign for that day and it said Gemini figures prominently in today's scheme. Well, and then what if the person says, well, I was doing such and such and I didn't have any Gemini friends that figured in prominently. Well, maybe you did and didn't realize it, because maybe the person may not have had the sun in Gemini, but maybe they had their moon or ascendant in Gemini. When you see in a daily horoscope reading and it states, well, this sign may figure prominently, I believe it can apply to the sun, moon, or ascendant. The interpretation or perception may be that it solely refers to it pertains to that person, a person's sun sign. It could actually be the sun, moon, or ascendant. So a lot of I guess the skepticism is really connected, I think, with the lack of the knowledge of astrology. You don't necessarily have to have something tangible in order to know something exists. I mean, many of us believe that there is a God. I believe there is a supreme being. But even if there's nothing tangible connected with it, you still believe it. You have faith. There's a faith in it. But I also have a philosophy, as many of you may know, that incorporates spirituality, religion, and astrology. I believe that there was a supreme being that put the stars and the constellations in positions for a reason. And people really have to really understand that astrology very well can be considered a science, but I think because you don't, as I stated before, you have such a wide divergence of house systems. You have the different methods of astrology, the different astrology systems, if you will, that they're in conflict. They're not, well, it's not something that's consistent. I think because you have so many branches, maybe that's why that might be factoring in as to why it isn't considered an actual subject. I think their actual main or primary reason could be because of the studies that have been done supposedly, and people, based on their quote-unquote studies, they say that that astrology isn't accurate. But it's because sometimes in those studies they might just be, they're not looking at really everything, I guess you could say, maybe in the most thorough manner, if you will. Let's say somebody's looking at something in their chart and they're saying, well, they have Mars well aspected and they have it in some kind of, like, I guess you could say, one of the work or career, well, the career house is the 10th, but I consider the 2nd, 6th, and 10th houses very strongly connected with the work life of the person, or could very well be connected with it. And if somebody were to have Mars in one of those houses, let's say, and it was well aspected, and let's say that the person was not considered athletic, they'll say, well, or the person doesn't have a job in the area of sports, they'll say, well, doesn't that debunk astrology and disprove it? And I don't know if you can really say that 100%. I mean, if somebody is brought up in an oppression or an impoverished situation, they might have a very minimal chance of becoming an athlete. But if somebody that has Mars in the 2nd, 6th, or 10th house can simply be putting a lot of aggressive energy into matters connected with one of those houses. Somebody that has the Mars in the 10th house, for example, doesn't mean 100% guarantee or assurance that a person's going to be an athlete, even if it's saying like Sagittarius. It could just show that the person can be put a lot of energy into their career, their livelihood. For example, doesn't necessarily mean that the person's going to be involved in sports. I think what happens is I think these studies are subjective in a way, and I think the studies are sometimes set up in order to disprove astrology. Somebody with Mars in the second house can simply be somebody that puts a lot of that energy, that aggressive energy, into matters connected with their resources, with their possessions, with generating money. Somebody with Mars in Sagittarius, it's not going to be 100%. Mars in Sagittarius well aspected, or even let's say somebody had let's say they had Sagittarius on the 10th, 6th, or 2nd house cusp. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person is going to be an athlete. It really it could mean that in some cases with some people, but what it could mean is strongly is that they're putting in those Sagittarian like qualities or attributes in matters connected with that particular house. Sagittarius on the cusp of the 10th house, for example, could have many a multitude of meanings. It may have, the person may have a career interest that's connected with Sagittarius, which could be many things though. It could be philosophy, it could be teaching, it could be connected somehow with the higher education. Sports, it could be sports is a possibility. Maybe the person has a career affiliated with sports. It could be something where the person it could be something with publishing. It could be something where the person injects a lot of that Sagittarian energy simply into career matters. It could be somebody that just puts a lot of exuberance, expansiveness, and enthusiasm into their career. It doesn't always mean that the person would have a career that's associated with the sign Sagittarius, but it could give a greater propensity for it. So those are some things I think to look at as well, as far as really understanding maybe why astrology has been debunked by many people, and the reality is it could really be classified as a science. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are more car accidents that occur on the full moon than any other time. So I think that there's something telling with that. And many of you may remember that there was, I talked about this in another video, that I believe, I wish I can remember exactly what it was, but when the atomic bomb was dropped in 1948, which basically was the eradication of World War II, basically ended it. There was some kind of there was an asteroid, or it was the true Lilith, or it was something, or something else that went into Scorpio right on that really on that same day. It went from Libra into Scorpio, and Scorpio is connected with the sign Pluto, and Pluto is connected with plutonium, which is a strong proponent, if I'm not mistaken, in the atomic bomb. And I just feel that was too coincidental to dismiss. People have actually worked murder cases and solved crimes, I believe, with the use of astrology. So there's enough for me to say that there is that astrology does exist very strongly and figures prominently in many people's lives. And the people that don't want to classify it as an actual science, and that's their own thing, but it's not going to stop me and from many other people from classifying it as an actual science inwardly in what we really believe. And that's what really counts, is that the people in the astrology community, we do believe, I would feel at least the majority does, that it is an actual science, that we know what the truth is and what's veracious in our hearts. Well, anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment as to why astrology is not considered an actual science. And stay tuned next time, where I'll be continuing my series on the part of fortune in the houses. Two things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone, because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart, and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.